Let me introduce Joel Peterson. It's an honor for us to have him on campus. Normally he charges a lot of money to go speak to people, and we're getting him for lunch. So we have a great opportunity to hear from Joel. He was the 12-year chairman of the company JetBlue Airways. He retired in May of 2020. I think they had a mandatory retirement at the age of 40, didn't they, Joel? Made you retire? He's the former chairman of the Hoover Institute and the founding partners of Peterson Partners, a private equity firm in Utah, Salt Lake based, with over $1 billion under management. He's a business leader, investor, teacher, and author now, who's worked firsthand with over 2,300 businesses, hundreds of partners, and thousands of leaders. Since 1992, Peterson has been on the faculty at the Graduate Business School at Stanford University, teaching courses in real estate investment, entrepreneurship, and leadership. He was the original seed investor for several of his students' businesses, so you ought to hit him up after and see if he's good for a cool meal on your business idea. He was formerly served as the chief executive officer of Trammell Crow Company, and when we visited last week, we found we had some common friends there. At the time, it was the world's largest private commercial real estate development company in the world. He earned his MBA from Harvard Business School after receiving a bachelor from Brigham Young University, but according to Diana, he picked up more than a bachelor's degree there. I'll let him tell that story. Joel has received the Distinguished Teaching Award at Stanford Graduate School of Business. He's the author of Entrepreneurial Leadership, The Art of Launching New Ventures, Inspiring Others, and Running Stuff. 6 people who participate in Q&A and ask good questions, if I get the nod from Joel, will receive a copy of this book. Today, he's joined by his wife, Diana. They are the parents of 7 children and grateful to have 28 grandchildren, 3 of whom were born in the year 2020. Without further ado, let me introduce Joel Peterson to the stage.
I'm delighted to be with you. It feels strange to talk to a group of garbage bags as well as great young future entrepreneurs, but I'm really delighted to be here. Last spring, I taught a course at Stanford, and I always try to create a community in the class. So the students get to know each other, and we do a lot of role plays. We have students come up in front of the class and do things, and it's a fun class, and there's a real community spirit that happens, and there's a lot of humor in the class. And the first day I taught it, I remember telling a joke to dead silence. I mean, the screen, you tell a joke to a screen with a bunch of postage stamp size faces on it, and you can't hear a word, and I thought, this is going to be a long quarter. So I know this is not ideal for you or for me, but I really am delighted to be here. I want to do 3 things today, actually. Tom invited me to tell you a little bit about my background, and so I'm going to do some of that, if I can find this thing. And then I want to talk about becoming an entrepreneurial leader, because I think that's really a kind of leadership that is not being an entrepreneur, but it's melding together several of the kinds of leadership that allow you to be particularly impactful, to build profitable businesses that are also enduring. So one of the ways that I describe it is that you're building an enduring business. And then I want to open it up to Q&A. The fact that I've got Q&A at the end doesn't mean that you should feel like you can't interrupt if you want. So I want you to feel comfortable if something doesn't make sense to you, or if you want to know more about something, or you want me to stop talking about it, you want to know less about it, to just interrupt. This is interactive. This is a very cozy group. It should be just as interactive as you want it to be. So this is how I'd like to be known. When you get to be 73 years old, you've been around the block a few times. So here I am teaching. This is me. I think I may be on TV there promoting this book. This is with Oscar Munoz, who's the chairman of United Airlines, Ray Dalio, who's a famous, I think he's the 18th richest person in America, a famous investor. He's written a book. Does anybody know what his book's called? Principles, I think. It's a bestseller. Ray was a section mate of mine. So I've founded Peterson Partners about 25 years ago. I've been at Stanford for a long time. And if you look at this, this is kind of the history. I was at Trammell Crow Company for 19 years. That ended badly, and we can talk about that. And I found myself having to do a bunch of other things. Steve Covey invited me to join the Covey Leadership Center, which I did and became vice chairman there. And then I started teaching at Stanford, and then I founded my own businesses and was asked to go on the board at JetBlue. I don't know if any of you know JFK, but I developed Terminal 5 at JFK because I'd had this real estate development experience. So I did that, and then I was asked to become chairman at JetBlue. And then I was the chairman of the Hoover Institution, which is a think tank on the campus at Stanford University. And then in the meantime, we had 7 kids, and I have 29 grandkids, but Diana, you're gonna have to tell me.
It's just Amelia when you count her or not.
Let's count Amelia. We lost one, and so Diana always makes me count the one we lost, and so with Amelia, it's 29. Okay, I've got it right. Good. So now that said, I showed a couple of slides. The last time I talked at UVU, I showed a couple of slides. So if you see that, you think, oh, well, that's somebody who's done a lot of things, who's successful. I just want you to know that this is where I was born. Does anybody know what this is called, this kind of a structure? It's a Quonset hut. Quonset huts are these metal huts that were built in the war. And so I spent the first couple of years of my life in a Quonset hut and then moved to high cotton here. And this is the first house I remember. So you can tell I did not grow up as a trust fund baby with a lot of opportunities. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about sort of how I got from there to all these things that sound like I've had lots of advantages in my life. And I say this to you in case any of you is thinking, oh gosh, I don't think I could do that. When I was your age, I was probably nowhere near as far along as you all are. So I'm going to give you a little bit of my background. My parents, my dad grew up in Vernal, Utah. If any of you know where that is, it's where the Dinosaur National Monument is. Little tiny town. He bought a Model T Ford when he was 14 years old and started driving. He didn't wait till he was old enough to drive, put a pillow on the seat, and he delivered fresh vegetables around his town. He hired his little brother, who then died when he was 11 years old of spinal meningitis. And the only thing that I ever followed my dad on, I started my first business when I was 11 years old, and it was to grow produce. I hired my little brother to deliver it around town, not in a Model T, but pulling a radio flyer wagon around town. He's a cute little guy, and so people would pay up for the fresh vegetables, fresh produce. We found a letter from me to my grandmother a number of years later where I said, Grandma, I had a great summer. I made $14 and I paid Ted a nickel. So you can tell I had some entrepreneurial instincts early on. Early on, I thought I might have a career in track. It turned out that I was the fastest person in my school. And I ran in a Michigan-wide track meet, and I was jostled at the beginning of this race, and I ended up tying, not winning it, but I thought, for sure, the next year I'm going to win, and I'm on my way to Olympic gold, for sure. I don't know if any of you has felt that way about being successful early on in your life. You just imagine great things. The next year I couldn't even win in my own school. People had grown, etc. So I went on and made the basketball team and was assigned to the bench. So I rode the bench. So I quit basketball. I said, okay, basketball is not for me. You can tell by my size that basketball would not be my thing. So I became a wrestler, and I dislocated my shoulder and was unable to carry that forward. So I had to pack in my athletic ambitions, and finding no one to blame, I then found that I was actually good at French. And for some reason or another, it spoke to me. And so I ended up ultimately joining a college called Justin S. Morrill College, which was an experimental little college within Michigan State University. Michigan State University had 40,000 students, which I understand what you've got here. So it was a big university. I was in this small college, but that's what I did. Then I went on an LDS mission in France, and I thought, well, maybe I'll become a French teacher. When I was at Michigan State, somebody told me that I had leadership ability. So I thought, well, what do leaders do? And the only one that I knew anything about was the president of Michigan State University. So I thought, well, I'll become the president of Michigan State University someday. I mean, that was how silly. And when Diana and I met, she thought I was on my way to becoming a university president. But then when I went to Harvard Business School, that died. I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. I mean, so I don't know if any of you is at that point. You may be more focused than I, but I remember as a kid, my dad taking me to Cobo Hall in Detroit for the auto show and thinking, oh, maybe I'll go into the auto industry. Detroit was kind of the Silicon Valley of the day. 80% of the world's cars were made in Detroit at the time. I rode off to every single automobile company. I got brochures back from them. They encouraged me to go to Purdue or GM Tech or some engineering school. George Romney was the president of American Motors at that point in time, and he became the governor of Michigan. So I thought, well, maybe I'll become a politician. I don't know if you're all too young to know this, but he ran for president just as his son Mitt did. He was caught having said, I was brainwashed. He was a promoter of the Vietnam War until he came back from a trip to Vietnam and made the comment, I was brainwashed. And once he said that, it was over. And I remember making a mental note, don't say stupid stuff. Don't let there be any skeletons in your closet. And so I thought, just in case the presidency ever beckons me. So you can imagine that I had no idea what I was doing. In any event, I got out of BYU, where I had a wonderful couple of years there. I spent my first year at Michigan State, did a mission, a couple of years at BYU. Then I went directly to Harvard Business School, and I thought, well, that'll certainly help me figure out what I want to do with my life. And it didn't. I ended up taking a law school class. I ended up taking a doctoral class, and I couldn't figure out what I wanted to till one day a fellow by the name of Trammell Crow came to class. Trammell Crow was a Texas real estate developer, quite well known at the time. And I remember the students, it was a group probably about this many students if all of these seats were filled. And at the end of his talk, one of the students said, Mr. Crow, to what do you credit your success in life? And I remember he had a bald head, and I remember sitting there and just rubbing his bald head for what seemed like a minute. I'm sure it was 10 seconds, but it seemed like a minute. And he looked around at everybody and he says, love. And the room went dead silence. And I always have said, it's the only four-letter word those Harvard Business School students didn't know. So they were just blown away. And I was blown away, and I thought, my gosh, somebody who loves what he does, who loves the people he works with, I want to work for somebody like that. So I went up to him after class, and I said, are you hiring? And he said, well, I am. I don't have time now, but I'll be back in Boston in a couple of weeks. Why don't you come see me? Call my assistant and make something. So I called Elsa Miller, his assistant, and made an appointment to see him at the Ritz-Carlton in Boston. I arrived early. As Diana will tell you, I'm early for absolutely everything I do. As Tom knows that from this morning too. I just am early. And so we called, and I called his room, and I think I woke him up. And I said, I'm down here in the lobby, Mr. Crow. I just wanted you to know. And he said, well, just come on up to my room. I'm in room 702. Come on up. And so I go up to his room, knock on the door, and here's this guy in boxer shorts and a tank top, and he looks groggy. So he's just gotten up, and he says, come on in. And so it's kind of awkward. This is a really famous, powerful guy, and I'm all dressed up in my blue suit and ready to go. And he says, just have a seat. We'll talk. And I look around, and every chair is covered with a suitcase or a briefcase or something. There's only his unmade bed. And he said, just sit on the bed. So I hop on his unmade bed. He goes into the bathroom and starts shaving in interviewing me through the bathroom door. And by the end of the time, he had offered me a job in Paris, France, to become a developer. And so 10 months later, Diana and I, with a newborn infant that was 4 months old, found ourselves in Paris, France, as developers. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. No notion of what career I would pursue. But there I was. So my first assignment was to raise $10 million for twin 30-story office buildings in a commune called Bagnolet, which is on the eastern edge of Paris, and called Les Mercuriales. And so I put together a financial model, as you would. It was the best financial model I'd ever put together. I did my very best, fresh out of Harvard Business School effort to build this financial model. And I looked at it and I said, oh my gosh, this thing is going to run out of money. This won't be enough. And whoever the investor is going to lose the $10 million. So I said, let me take a look at the documents, at the joint venture documents. And so I reviewed the joint venture documents, and in French, because I'd been on a mission in France, and I had this Justin S. Morrill College training, I was pretty good at French. So I read these things and I said, wait a minute, we're on the bottom side of a guarantee. And all that means is that we're not liable at this point in time. We can return this project to our venture partners and earn fees rather than equity. And I thought I'd invented the wheel. I thought, they're going to be so impressed. Here's this young kid, fresh out of school, who's figured this, who's cracked the code. And so I told this to the CFO who'd given me the assignment, and he said, my job is to decide to raise the capital. Your job is to go get it. Now do it. And I thought, this is idiotic. Whoever I sell on this is going to lose $10 million, and this is going to be a failure. And so I went down the street in Paris to McKinsey and started interviewing for a job. Well, the managing partner of the company got wind that I was doing that, and he called me up and he said, what are you doing? And I said, I just can't do this. This makes no sense to me. I know I'm fresh out of school, but this makes no sense to me to do this. He looked at it, he analyzed it, and he came back and he says, you know what, you're right. He gave the project back to ICI NatWest, who were our British pension fund investors. We worked for fees rather than equity. And within about a year, I was asked to come back to Dallas to become the treasurer of the company. And this was the largest private real estate development company in the world at that point in time. And so I thought, wow, this is a kind of an early on thing. This is a little bit scary, but I'll do it. So I get back to Dallas, and I find that the company has no cash. And if you know what a treasurer does, the treasurer is in charge of managing cash. And so that's why the job was offered to me, obviously, not because I was anything special, but there was just no cash to manage. And then the chief financial officer, seeing the writing on the wall, left. And so here I am, 28 or 29 years old, asked to become the chief financial officer of this big real estate development company, who is on the verge of bankruptcy, on the verge of insolvency. Now, that sounds like not a great thing. I will tell you that that's one of the great opportunities of life, because I got involved in workouts, I rolled up my sleeves, I worked 80-hour weeks. It was a fantastic experience. And there was a fellow by the name of Kenneth Leventhal, who was a pretty famous workout guy, a CPA, accountant, whatever. And I remember one time, after a meeting with a bunch of lawyers and staff and CPAs and everything, he came up to me, and I had to be the youngest CFO he had ever worked with. I mean, at 29, here's this 60-year-old dean of finance who's working with Donald Trump, with Olympia in York, with Crow and everything. He came up to me and said, I know who you are. I thought, uh-oh, he's figured out that I don't know what the heck I'm doing. He said, you're the guy that sweeps up after the elephants. And he captured it, that I was really just sweeping as madly as I could. Long story short, I ended up doing that for a number of years. I was put on the board. I became a fairly senior partner. I became one of the 3 most senior partners in the organization, and eventually left, was called back, managed a turnaround for a couple of years as the managing partner, and then I was fired and sued and defamed and left in a ditch, basically, for dead. So terrible. So that's why I have this, if you saw that RIP sign there, whoop, kind of rest in peace, because it felt like, I don't know how old I would have been at the time, but I would guess, Diana, early 40s, something like that. And you were pregnant with our 7th child at the time, and here I was out of work with a reputation that had been tattered. I got 2 job offers. One was from Dick Marriott to run Host Marriott. And as I flew back to DC, I said, I don't think I can take it. But he said, I want you to fly back to DC, talk to me about it. I put him in touch with the guy who ultimately took the CEO job, and then Stanford University. I'd been on the advisory council to the business school, and they said, let me see the lawsuit that you're involved in. They read it, and they signed off on it, and I said, that's okay, come on in and teach for a year. So I started over in my mid-40s, with a bunch of kids and a lot of worries and a reputation that was tattered. And so I ended up starting to buy companies, and around this time I bought I started the Peterson Partners and Ventures, et cetera. So in any event, that's kind of the person. Whoops, I'm going the wrong way, I think. I'm going the right way. So that's kind of the personal story. Tom, that may have been more than you wanted me to cover, but in any event, give you some sense. I think it's always interesting to look at the road others have trod, because sometimes when you're young, you think, gosh, I don't know where the forks in the road are, which is the best fork. You know the Robert Frost poem, 2 roads diverged in the woods, and I took the one less traveled by, and it has made all the difference. And I would say where there are forks divide in the road, you'll have to make tough choices, and these are your moments of truth. Some will work out really well, others won't work out so well, and you'll have to retrace, and others still you won't be able to fix. And you're just going to have to live with the regret that comes to that. But so I'm 73 years old today, and I've been through the dark woods and have made a bunch of these tough choices. So what I wanted to talk to you today, so I've written one book called The 10 Laws of Trust. I spoke here about this a couple of years ago at UVU. Then I've just finished this book, Entrepreneurial Leadership. And since COVID, we can't do anything. So I've been writing this book called Moments of Truth that has to do with some of these stories, where I'm really I'm thinking back through my life and saying, what were the crossroads? When was I in the wilderness, and when did I pick which road and why, and what worked out and what didn't work out? So I may publish that eventually, I may not. If I do, it'll be my last ever book. So what I want to talk with you today about is entrepreneurial leadership. So here's kind of my entrepreneurial experience. From doing all these deals, I've learned a lot about entrepreneurial leadership. I learned a lot being an entrepreneur myself, but I learned a lot investing in life. I learned a lot by teaching a course at Stanford. You may recognize some of these faces. You won't recognize all of them. One of them is a lunch lady in the East Bay, and she's phenomenal. She has changed the world of school lunches. So these are all leaders. They're all entrepreneurs. They're all amazing people. Just some of them happen to be really famous worldwide, and others you've never heard of. But these are folks that have passed through this class. It's the most popular class at the Stanford Business School. And so for 15 years now, I've had this constant parade of entrepreneurs. So I've been paying attention to what has worked for them and what hasn't. I've been fascinated by this issue of how hard it is to build an enduring business. 7 out of 10 fail, but the real story is that the ones that succeed, 90% of them dramatically change their business plan before they're successful. So if I see a business plan from one of you, I'm going to know that it's going to morph. It's going to evolve. In fact, the best entrepreneurs are the ones that fail the quickest, morph things the quickest, try something new, et cetera, et cetera. So I really was interested in this whole process of how do you go from idea to product or service to profitable business to enduring company. Now, I want to spend just a second here on profitable business because this is what you'll learn a lot about here at UVU, because we've got really developed maps for building profitable businesses. And just to touch on them quickly, the first one is we know about operations, where fundamentally you have an income statement, you can increase revenues and decrease costs, and we know all the ways to do that. We know that we can manage a balance sheet. We can finance things differently. We can reduce capital intensity. We can reduce cost of capital. We can change sources of capital. Those are dials. If you think about building a profitable business, you've got those dials. The third set of dials you've got are the human resources, where you're building a team, putting them together, ways to do that. And there are good maps for doing that. And then the final one is the strategy one, where you have new channels, new customers, new offerings, new processes, where you're fundamentally trying to build a moat around your business. And you're trying to build it wide and deep. And so they're the ways that we build a profitable business. I was on the board, and so I got good at that. I got good at figuring out, how do I turn a business from an idea to a product or service to a profitable business? And do any of you know the company Bonobos? Is that a company you've heard of? A couple of people. In any event, I was the first investor in Bonobos and kind of the lead director at Bonobos. And again, as I said to you earlier, and I always go early, so I was early at every single board meeting there. I'd be there 15 minutes early and meet with the management team, etc. Well, one day they started the board meeting at 8 rather than 8:30. So rather than being 15 minutes early, I was 15 minutes late. And you know how you do when you walk into a meeting late? You just kind of slip at the back and you're really quiet for a while. So I didn't say anything. I slipped in the back of the board meeting. And about 10 minutes into the meeting, I said, so when do we make our first dollar of profit? And the room burst into laughter. Every single board member laughed. And I said, what's funny about that? And they said, we had a bet as to how long it would take before you would ask, when do we make our first dollar of profit? Because I'm so focused on that. I think it's one of the critical things you do. It changes your life as an entrepreneur when you're no longer reliant on going outside for capital to stay alive, and you're able to generate capital internally. So I really try to get all the companies making $1 worth of profit as soon as possible. So these are the maps that we've got. But that doesn't necessarily make you an enduring company. So I really started to study, how do companies go from being profitable, flash in the pans, lasting for a little while, to then turning into these companies that are just institutions that last for generations, that change the world. What goes on? And that's when I got around to this idea of, looking back on our businesses, and here are some of the unicorns that we've backed, and here are the turnarounds that I've done, and saying, okay, we've got the profitable business maps here, but how do you build a durable enterprise? It's a different set of maps. So, entrepreneurs are able to assemble things and manage them to the point that they can actually create something where they don't control all the inputs. That's really what entrepreneurs do. They're able to manage and assemble inputs that they don't control. So entrepreneurs are pretty amazing. So I wanted to put together a set of maps for this and say, what's the foundation? I'm going to run through this quickly. But laying the foundation for this really are these four things. So you've got to drill the piers. In other words, get all the way to bedrock on these four areas. The first one is you have to build trust. And there are two elements to trust. Well, I'm going to talk first, before I get into that, let me just mention that the entrepreneurial leader, to me, has elements of being an entrepreneur. Many entrepreneurs are able to light fires and they can't keep them burning. You've seen this thing they call the founder's trap, where entrepreneurs get things started and then the business fails. So the idea is the entrepreneurial leader is able to keep it burning, to build the enduring company. So the elements are the entrepreneur who can light fires, innovate, whatever, the manager who deals with complexity, the administrator who can deal with policy, who can create long-term policy, the politician who can make deals, trade-offs, arrange compromises, and then finally the presider who kisses babies, cuts ribbons, maintains the status quo. All 5 of those elements you need in order to be an entrepreneurial leader. If you're going to build an enduring company, you have to have all of those elements. So, and you have to be able to get all the way around the compass. I don't know if you know this notion of a 5-tool player, but in baseball, all professional baseball scouts are always on the prowl for the 5-tool player. The 5-tool player is one that can run, throw, field, hit for power, and hit for average. The picture behind that is Willie Mays. You may not recognize Willie Mays, but he's probably the greatest 5-tool player ever to play baseball. You'll know Willie Mays, Tom. Maybe these young people won't. I've got over here Alan Mulally, who headed Ford. He ran Boeing and he ran Ford. Most people would not think of him as an entrepreneurial leader, but I think not an entrepreneur, but an entrepreneurial leader. Alan Mulally I could put in charge of any business in the world, and he would create an enduring company. So here's what the things that an entrepreneurial leader does. So trust, there's what trust is. The first thing is you've got to become trustworthy yourself, and there are ways to do that, which I describe in the book. And then you have to build a high trust culture. So not just you being trustworthy, but the whole company has to have this culture of trust. Things go faster, they're more durable, etc. And so that's why I wrote the 10 Laws of Trust, because the good news is you can be intentional. You can build a high trust culture if you're trustworthy and if you follow the laws of trust. So that's the idea here. And then I actually did a second edition on this one. HarperCollins bought it. The next thing is mission, is determining a mission, clarity around mission. One of the more famous ones was Winston Churchill, World War II. His mission was obviously victory. This was his famous blood, toil, tears, and sweat speech. And this is the picture taken of Churchill when he went to the House of Commons, or to the Parliament in Canada after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Yusuf Karsh, an Armenian-Canadian photographer, took a picture of him that was here on the left and said, that isn't capturing this brand of victory. And so he grabbed Churchill's cigar from him. Churchill leaned in and glowered. He snapped the picture, and this is the most iconic picture of World War II, is this one on the right-hand side. But that was his brand. There are business examples of mission and brand. Team, you've got to be able to source great people. You've got to be able to recruit them. You have to be able to interview them. You have to onboard them. Then you have to coach them. You have to reassign them. And ultimately, you have to fire people with empathy. Your job as an entrepreneurial leader is to make sure you've got the best possible team on the field at all times. And that means that you have to, you may have to let people go. Finally, execution is the last one. I won't go. I'll just hit these quickly. These are the 10 things that every entrepreneurial leader says they need to do. I put them all in the book fundamentally to say this is a checklist. You know, our pilots at JetBlue, though they've flown for 20 years, when they sit down in the cockpit, they go over a checklist. And they make sure everything is. And having a checklist is really powerful. So the idea is this is the checklist you need as an entrepreneur. You're going to have to be doing all 10 of these things. And here's how you do them effectively. And then finally, I talk about you know, how I execute. I always make sure I have a champion, clear deliverables, a timetable, and a budget. And then I sunset every project. And I connect it, I daisy chain it to the last meeting, and then I insist on one-page reports. So there's this rhythm of projects, and that's how you get to execution. The final things I'll put up here really are just tie that together, say we're going to, Graham Weaver, one of my colleagues at Stanford, read the book, and he said that he had more areas colored than blank still. And so I thought, this is the nicest thing anybody's ever said to me about anything. So I've captured it. And then also Jim Mattis, the former Secretary of Defense, read it. And he says, I'm using it in all my talks now. And he's such a phenomenal guy and a phenomenal leader. I figured, well, what the heck? I'll throw a slide in with his comment. I don't know how much time we've got, Tom, but...
We've got 15 minutes.
15 minutes. Okay, that may be about right. That may be way too much. It may not be enough, but fire away if you've got any Well, for me, the first thing was to assess what I was good at, because it was easy for me to say, well, wait a minute, I know real estate, but my brand had been trashed in the real estate industry. I'd been to the summit. I'd been to the top of the real estate mountain, and here all of a sudden I was back out in the job market and nobody was really offering me a job. So I had to reimagine. By the way, this is what everybody is going to have to do in COVID, I think, is reimagine. What do I deliver? And I said, you know what I'm really good at? Is I'm really good at helping entrepreneurs build businesses. Entrepreneurs are sometimes a little bit undisciplined. They're good at having the idea, launching something, and then moving on. But I actually know systems. I know how to think about a project. And so I said, I'm going to start doing that. So I started buying companies, and I found I was really a good coach. I could help them. We had successful outcomes. So I bought more and more companies, and then I raised funds to buy companies. And so, in Silicon Valley, they have this phrase about fail quickly. In other words, get out there, try something, and if it doesn't work, get in and tweak it. I think having confidence, giving yourself, credit. So I just didn't give up. I just don't give up. Maybe it's the Churchill thing, you just never give in, And so that was the mindset that I had. Does that respond? I didn't repeat the question either, did I? So the question is about what turning points and what did I learn from those turning points? I think in some ways that's the point of the stories I told, where those were what I call moments of reckoning. They were moments of truth where if I'd taken one path rather than the other, I would not have ended up in the same place. I'll tell a quick story. When I was in this dispute with Crow, and they'd filed suit in state court, county court, and federal court. And I was, when you think about looking down a dark road, that was a dark road for me. And I remember sitting in my living room. You'll remember this, Diana. But I had my head in my hands, and I was just thinking, oh my gosh, we've got 6 kids I've got to get through college, and Diana's pregnant with the 7th, and I'm out of work, and I've been sued for everything that we've got, and what do I do? And I remember this turning point where Diana came up from behind. I didn't hear her coming. She's like a cat. She sneaked up, and she gave me a hug. Sorry. I do this every time. It was the most meaningful moment, though, because I was staring into the abyss. I was so worried. And she said, you know what? If we have to move into a double wide, we'll be okay. They can't take our friends, our family, our faith, or our freedom. All they can take is our money. And that just gave me this sense of peace, this sense of, you know what, things are going to be okay. And that became a real turning point for me, because there was a moment in this whole thing where I thought, oh my gosh, what have I done? I had stood up against all the forces. This was Texas. The courts were against us. This very powerful company, very powerful people, and I was quite worried about it. Did you want to make a comment, Diana? You don't have a mic. So make it short and I'll repeat. So that was certainly a turning point. I think for me, though, it's another interesting one was my partners did not want to invest in JetBlue. After all, this is a startup airline. More people have gone bankrupt in going into the airline industry than probably any other industry. The Warren Buffett quote is, that the world would have been better off if Orville had just shot Wilbur. Was his comment about the airline industry. In any event, my partners turned it down. I took it on. We ended up having to make a change of CEO, and I was asked to become chairman. We just lost $85 million that year. We had a $2 billion book of planes on order. It was a scary time. I went and I talked to my faculty associates at Stanford who knew public companies, and they said, don't do it, Joel. It's hard enough to be the chairman of a public company in good times. You're going into a really challenging moment in a very tough industry. You're going to get your head handed to you, and it's going to destroy your reputation. So that became a turning point when I decided to do that. And I had to make a bunch of decisions and interview a bunch of people and get really confident that I would be able to move this to a new place. And so I did it, and after 12 years, we had the second best balance sheet in the airline industry and a great brand. It's not so well known here in Utah, but on the East Coast, it's a really well-known and beloved brand. What made me write the 10 Laws of Trust? I'd had enough experience with thousands of partners all over the world, and hundreds and really 2,700, I think, or 2,500 real estate projects, buying companies and everything. And I really realized that at the core was this notion of trust. If you really had high trust, if you did, and that means being a fiduciary. That means that you do what you say. And fundamentally, it's delivering on promises. And it means putting others' interests ahead of your own. And most people don't do that. Most people come to a point at which they say, I think I can get away with being really selfish or whatever. And I found that if you will maintain trust, that it's the most powerful thing. And I really got the idea that there were laws. There were things that if you did them over and over again, you could increase the trust level of your organization. And so I really wanted to teach people, how you do that. We would be a much better society. I really look at kind of today's political situation where we're divided into tribes and we're not trusting each other. We're not talking to each other. We're violating the laws of trust. And so I thought, in fact, I wrote it at the time when Clinton and Trump were running against each other. And I made the mistake, I was on a broadcast across the nation, and I made the mistake of saying, neither of these is trustworthy candidates. And I heard more about that than anything else I said the whole time. But I actually think it's a fundamental problem. And I think as a business leader, if you can be trustworthy, it will help your family, it will help all your relationships with everyone, but you'll actually bring on better people, you'll keep better people, you'll be able to act more quickly, you'll find decisions are more flexible, you can change them. So it's kind of a secret weapon. The bad thing about trust is it's fragile. It takes forever to build it up. You build it up a conversation at a time, a delivery at a time, and you can destroy it with one act. And so it's a very fragile thing. But I would say to you, if I could invite any of you to sort of develop your own personal brand around anything, I'd say develop it around being completely trustworthy. That means all the things that are written about in the book. I would say it's the most powerful thing. So if I could go back in life to my college days when I was far less certain of myself than I may appear today, what would I do differently? Or what advice would I give? The best advice I ever got was from my father, who could tell that I was agonizing over what career. He could tell. I remember my freshman year, I took geology, Shakespeare, Fortran programming, math, a bunch of French. I mean, my transcript was a spaghetti dish. It was a mess. And there was and also my notion of career and everything. And he said, son, don't worry about it. Just take the best teachers. Focus on, find out whoever the best teacher is in whatever field and take them. You're going to learn something in geology, you'll learn something in Fortran program, you'll learn something in all these areas, but just absorb what the best teachers tell you. That turned out to have been great advice. Well, I think you started out the question with the right notion. We're seeing it become more and more important. I would say today, it's how businesses are going to survive and morph and become successful. I see technology being applied to old line businesses in ways that actually create new value. You're going to see people replaced. Incumbents are going to be replaced by people, young people like you, who come in with technology. So I would either become a technologist at some level or make sure that I understand how it can impact things, because I think it's vital. Real estate happened to be one of the industries that was the slowest to get into it. And about 5 years ago, one of my students really started to apply technology to real estate. And now you see all these Zillow and all these things out there. So the question as to why new organizations, startups fail. I think one of them is that people have not assessed the market accurately. Fundamentally, businesses survive if they're meeting a need. Find a problem and solve it in a way that is cheap, not necessarily cheap, but that is where the solution is more valuable than it costs you to have it solved. So that's the number one thing, and you've got to do that. The second thing is that people don't adjust. They have an idea and they execute on that idea. My experience is the really successful ones, they have assessed a market need, a market problem, they've come with a solution, and they get to the market quickly. They try it out. They get real live customers, and customers say, that sucks. That doesn't work. This is stupid. And they don't fight it, they embrace it. They say, thank you so much. How would you change it? And I find actually in people that go out and raise money too, one of the things that I learned early on was when somebody said no to something that I was doing, I said, I'm not going to try to sell you anymore on this idea, but I would love it if you would take another 3 or 4 minutes and tell me why you decided this was not something you wanted to invest in. It's that spirit that allows the entrepreneur then to tweak, adjust, refine, make it better. A third thing that two other things that I would say is, one is they don't have the right capital structure. They either have too much capital or they don't raise enough capital and they don't do it in a timely fashion. And the final one is they don't get the right team in place. Business is a team sport, and you want to have people that you can trust, that you can rely on, that add value, that are really wonderful human beings. And then you can do magical things with a team that you can't do individually. And I can see Tom's getting ready to
Give me the hook.
give me the hook.
Hey, thank you for coming.